Hello. This is the SJW Podcast, and I'm your host, Durin Jove. This is a podcast regarding social issues that are either underrepresented or distorted. Today's podcast is about the ongoing abuses against Native American people throughout the United States. At least since 1968, there were very weak laws protecting Native American women from being raped. That might now sound shocking to hear, that there were very weak laws protecting Native Americans from being raped within reservations. And this is not in isolated locations. This is throughout the country, from Alaska all the way to North and South Dakota. Rape and physical violence against Native Americans are higher than other people. And for the most part, the violence largely comes from outside the Native American community. In 86% of the cases of sexual violence, such as forcible rapes, there are attempts to blame Native American communities themselves because people who have been to reservations see gang violence and drug usage and alcohol usage, and the general consensus or general belief from people who are witnesses to that seem to portray it as a Native American problem within reservations, but that ignores the actual laws and the social conditioning that created those situations in the first place, that stretch in a very horrific history that goes as far back as the 1800s. I hope to give a clear understanding of what is going on regarding rape and physical violence against Native Americans within reservations throughout the United States, so that in no uncertain terms you understand what caused the lawlessness in many Native American reservations and the drug use and the alcohol abuse. So I will just list the pertinent laws that were listed in bullet points from Amnesty International USA's full report on Native American abuses in Chapter 4 regarding jurisdiction issues imposed upon Native Americans in reservations. Okay, to start with, the Major Crimes Act of 1885 granted the federal authorities jurisdiction over certain serious crimes, including rape and murder, committed in, they refer to it as Indian country. I think it would be more accurate to say Native American reservations or tribal lands, but you understand my meaning. Or perhaps indigenous peoples' lands would be better. Moving on. Most state authorities do not exercise criminal jurisdiction over Native Americans in Indian country. However, Public Law 280, made in 1953, transferred federal criminal jurisdiction over all offenses, including Native Americans in Indian country, to state governments in some states. The U.S. Congress gave these states, California, Minnesota, Nebraska, Oregon, Wisconsin, and Alaska, upon statehood, extensive criminal and civil jurisdiction over Indian country. Public Law 280 also permitted certain additional states, Arizona, Florida, Idaho, Iowa, Montana, Nevada, North Dakota, South Dakota, Utah, and Washington, to acquire jurisdiction if they wished. And while a number of states originally opted to do so, currently only Florida has full Public Law 280 jurisdiction. Where Public Law 280 is applied, both tribal and state authorities have concurrent jurisdiction over crimes committed on tribal land by American Indians or Alaskan Natives. Public Law 280 is seen by many indigenous peoples as an affront to tribal sovereignty, not least because states have the option to assume and to relinquish jurisdiction, a power not extended to the indigenous peoples affected. In addition, Congress failed to provide additional funds to Public Law 280 states to support the law enforcement activities they had assumed. The BIA, however, reduced funding to tribal authorities as a result of the shift in jurisdiction. This has led to a situation where tribal and state authorities have not received sufficient funds to assume their respective law enforcement responsibilities, resulting in a sense of lawlessness in some communities and difficult relations between tribal and state officials. Essentially, these states have the laws to impose criminal penalties upon Native American lands, and some states which exercise these laws can just relinquish them at any time if they choose to do so, and then impose them whenever it is convenient for them. The others have full control and don't really effectively help these Native American communities in these reservations from ongoing crimes such as rape and murder. Now, the next one, which is just as important, the Indian Civil Rights Act of 1968 limits the penalty which can be imposed by tribal courts for any offense, including murder or rape, to a maximum of 1 year's imprisonment and a U.S. fine of $5,000. The message sent by the law is that, in practice, tribal justice systems are only equipped to handle less serious crimes as a result of the limitation on their custodial sentencing powers. Some tribal courts are less likely to prosecute serious crimes, such as sexual violence. Now, while this could be shifted to blame the tribal courts themselves, they're not well-funded or well-trained as a result of the lack of funding, which was a responsibility by these states, and by the federal government, which is important to understand. And because of this reduction in actual funding, people in 86% of the cases, of the reported cases according to Amnesty International, non-Native men would go into reservations and rape Native American women. And of course, children are particularly vulnerable in such situations, especially when the law doesn't protect them or help them at all. So this situation has been going on since at least the 1960s, and obviously before that, when they were first forced on the reservations, not counting the history of abuses from the Trail of Tears, the Long Walk, and some of the most horrific stories about what happened to Native Americans by eyewitness accounts of the perpetrators and survivors throughout U.S. history. But in this particular modern case, Native Americans effectively had no protections, no legitimate protections from being murdered or raped by non-Native men. And although Amnesty International doesn't say it, I think it's clear that it is U.S. citizens, opportunists, not the general public, but opportunists who come in and commit these abuses. Which brings me to the Supreme Court case that is very important to understanding how these abuses were allowed to continue. In 1978, the Supreme Court ruled that tribal courts could not exercise criminal jurisdiction over non-Indian U.S. citizens. This ruling, in the case of Oliphant v. Suquamish, effectively strips tribal authorities of the power to prosecute crimes committed by non-Indian perpetrators on tribal land. The decision raises issues of sovereignty which are beyond the scope of this report. It also denies victims of sexual violence due process and the equal protection of the law. Jurisdictional distinctions based on the race or ethnicity of the accused, such as the jurisdictional limitation here, have the effect in many cases of depriving victims of access to justice in violation of international law and U.S. constitutional guarantees. Tribal courts are the most appropriate forms of adjudicating cases that arise on tribal land, and, as this report finds, state and federal authorities often do not prosecute those cases of sexual violence that arise on tribal land and fall within their exclusive jurisdiction. This situation is of particular concern given the number of reported crimes of sexual violence against Native American women, including involving non-Indian men. In such situations, either federal or state authorities have the authority to intervene. Reportedly, the apparent gap in jurisdiction or enforcement has encouraged non-Indian individuals to pursue criminal activities of various kinds in Indian country. Tribal police do have limited powers of arrest over non-Indian suspects in some states. They also retain the power to detain non-Indian suspects in Indian country in order to transfer them to either federal or state authorities, but this is not generally understood by tribal, state, or federal authorities. Regarding tribal authorities, it is due to lack of funding and lack of training as a result of the lack of funding. For state and federal officials, this is pure complicity. And I really don't mean to demean state and federal government officials in this manner. I understand that the majority of them are doing good work and helping people, but in this particular case, it was a resounding failure to stop rape crimes against Native American women throughout the country, and this did result in child rapes on Native American land. And in 86% of the cases, it was non-Native men who committed these crimes, meaning U.S. citizens, unfortunately. Opportunistic U.S. citizens with unsavory intentions would come in and rape Native American women because they knew they could get away with it, and because effectively there was no court protection or strong laws to protect Native American women or to allow them to even have any sort of rights, unfortunately. Stepping back for a moment, I want to make it clear that these abuses are not because of something deeply negative about Native American culture, which is a very racist and wrong argument. Native American men are not the majority of abusers by a long shot. The majority are U.S. citizens who come into the reservations, non-Native men. Abuses are not because of habits of Native American people. Attempts to blame them for drinking and gambling habits, which is completely erroneous to why these crimes are happening. These crimes are not because of sexualization of the otherness of Native American women, which was also an argument, but that is also not true. It is because of these laws that created weak protections and allowed for rampant sexual violence against Native Americans in reservations. It is because of the complicity and apathy of federal and state agencies in protecting the rights of people in this country. And these are very clear violations of human rights. And they are a form of systemic racism. I would like to now talk about abuses in the past that continue to have an impact on Native American societies in our modern times. From the 1880s to the 1960s, the U.S. government had a boarding school program for Native American children that attempted to civilize the savage within Native American children. That was the official concept behind these schools. Due to racism in the 1880s, there were no real options besides these boarding schools, these Christian boarding schools, for Native American children. Children as young as 6 were shipped off, sometimes forcibly shipped off through military troops coming in to take them away from their families to these boarding schools, in which they were forced to shave their heads, learn new English names, forget their Native American names. And in many of these places, children, again, as young as 6, were forced to learn, in essence, drilling instructions on how to be more civilized members of society so that they could be integrated into the United States. Christian nuns would physically assault them, sometimes sexually abuse them, oftentimes starve them and force them into physical labor. and they were forced to take it all to learn to be civilized. Punishment, what they called discipline, was consistent with what we regard as physical abuse, or child abuse, physical and sexual, in our contemporary times. But they called it discipline and forced these children into these drills, and if they acted up or tried to speak in their native language, they were assaulted, sexually abused, starved. For entertainment, they were forced to watch movies depicting cowboys shooting and killing Native Americans, in which Native Americans were portrayed as rapists and bloodthirsty savages. This had a very terrible impact on Native American families in our contemporary times. Men and women who went through this program, who grew up being physically and sexually abused, ended up repeating a lot of what perpetrators did to them on their own families, because unfortunately it was all they knew. They were taught that it was discipline. In recent years, there's also been a breakdown of Native American families. Again, Native Americans are blamed for this, but historically it is because Native American men who went to fight in World War II were not given treatment for PTSD like other American soldiers who fought bravely. And unfortunately, this contributed to the breakdown of contemporary Native American families. The post-World War II generation of Native American women went to Christian boarding schools, which taught them to be ashamed of their bodies. And honor and shame are a very deep component of Native American culture, from what I am to understand. So this had a very negative impact on their self-image and their sense of independence. Now, to the best of what I understand, many Native American cultures were matrilineal, with the mother being the head of the household. And these Christian boarding schools essentially did everything to change that, to make women feel subservient to men within Native American communities and decrease their freedom and agency in family decisions, because that is what good Christian women are supposed to do, according to Christian values from the 1880s to the 1960s. Unfortunately, I have to bring this up because it did have a disastrous impact on contemporary Native American families today. Due to all these situations, especially the lawlessness in Native American reservations, Native American men have a very high suicide rate, very high in drug and alcohol abuse. Many of them quit school by middle school. Some of them have trouble with reading and writing, unfortunately. Gang and crime violence are a problem in many reservations. And this has led to a very high kill count of Native American men by police, by U.S. police. In some years, they are even higher than the killings of unarmed Black American men. And unfortunately, no one talks about it, or how these communities have effectively been destroyed as a result of the federal government treating them more like an enemy nation than as people within the United States who deserve rights. And by that, I mean human rights. Now, I understand some people might be hesitant to defend Native American communities as a result of this, but the gang violence, alcohol abuse, drug abuse is not because of anything within their culture or because they don't want to change. It is because of long-term U.S. policies that are, for all intents and purposes, systemic racism that still has a negative impact on these communities. And in all honesty, might be driving them to extermination. And that disturbs me. But it is not because of choices they made. It is because of the social conditioning they are subjected to. And that difference should be made clear and understood by everyone. The national news media tries to portray the violence and crime as a Native American problem, but in reality, it is because of U.S. laws and lack of protections for the human rights of these people. And they deserve better. Because every human being deserves better. And for any Native Americans possibly listening to this podcast, I apologize if anything I've said has been construed negatively or has hurt you emotionally in any way. That is not my intention. So I apologize if any of my language was crass or insulting or patronizing, because that was not my intention. And as a U.S. citizen, I feel I must apologize for everything that your communities have been subjected to, because it is just horrifying, and no one deserves it. One of the most disturbing acts of complicity by state governments and possibly federal was sterilization campaigns of Native American women throughout the 60s and 70s because of the prevailing belief that problems within minority communities, including Black and Latina, were a result of some ethnic problem within themselves and their DNA. And this led to programs in which Black women, Latina women, and especially Native American women were sterilized by different state governments. I've put a link in the description. And just as horrifying, in our contemporary times, there is a lack of quality medical care for Native Americans within reservations, to the point that rape victims, such as in South Dakota, have to drive 90 miles to the nearest hospital for rape kits to get the evidence for the crime that was committed. In Alaska, rape violence is so bad that the rapists will laugh oftentimes whenever Native Americans try and threaten legal action. And Alaskan Native mothers have had to tell their daughters what to expect when a U.S. citizen comes to rape them because of the lack of legal protections for so long throughout this country's history. That is an event that has been happening and has been ignored. And that the establishment media, especially that New York Times article, tries to divert as a Native American problem, while ignoring the actual laws that caused those issues. Now, more recently, with the amendment of the Violence Against Women's Act in 2012, there have been more effective legal protections made to protect Native American women throughout the country. But there is still the lack of funding in certain areas, and it is still a problem that persists to this day, even though it may not be as bad in some areas as it was previously. But it still goes on, and it is still being underreported, as is the shootings of Native American men, the high kill count. And this is despite peaceful protests throughout American history that have been shut down or ignored and made ineffectual. At the very least, this has been noticed and at least somewhat addressed by Congress as of 2012. But there are still abuses, there are still problems, and in all honesty, This should never, and I mean never, have been a problem in the first place. And I mean that sincerely. I'm just disgusted that it took till 2012. Meanwhile, we act as if this country is better than third world countries that have these problems, not due to ignoring them, but due to legitimate lack of resources to address them effectively. In fact, as recent as 2015, the Congress has abused Native American property rights by simply taking Native American land to begin drilling operations. Fortunately, by January of this year, the Obama administration was able to give compensation for the damages inflicted as a result of this bill not necessarily complying with tribal to U.S. laws. And President Obama has made it easier for Native American communities to effectively get legal representation. But there can still be more done to effectively address these issues, especially the rape crimes and the murder. Now, violations of Native American health rights still continue to this day as a result of the lack of quality care in IHS facilities. IHS stands for Indian Health Services. And in certain locations, they were promised these services paid for by the U.S. government, but the cutting of funding has effectively meant that they do not get healthcare services like normal U.S. citizens, and have to wait in a long backlog and drive miles away from most reservations to get quality care, including for pregnancies. In fact, many Native American women, especially in South Dakota, are coerced into early pregnancies and not informed of the ramifications before doing so, and not able to talk to family because they're essentially put on the spot to do these. And an important component to understand is the IHS is a very decentralized organization, and not all of the care facilities are the same. But some are so bad that they turn away rape victims. They have a lack of healthcare training and funding for rape kits to help women who've survived rape in Native American reservations. And to speak frankly, I am deeply disgusted by what I've learned, and I hope it is effectively addressed and that these rape crimes are effectively stopped, because no one deserves that, and that these mass shootings also are stopped. But considering the complicity and apathy for what Native Americans have gone through since at least the 1880s, and what they continue to face, it is unlikely that they will have all these hardships ameliorated, unfortunately, because the history shows us that there is very little that the U.S. government is willing to do. That has changed more recently, but I can see it regressing just as easily, unfortunately, and that makes it all the more tragic. If you have any comments or questions for me regarding this topic, or my opinions on issues pertaining to this topic, please feel free to email me at jovejarin@hotmail.com. You can also comment in comment sections. If you are listening to this from a website that has a comment section, then please feel free to do so. But I can more effectively answer questions through email than comment sections. Just letting you all know that right off the bat. I failed to mention that in my earlier podcast. I apologize. I will put links in the description box, if there is a description box, from where you're listening to this, so that you get the full information regarding the authenticity of what I have just spoken of. I hope you have found this information informative. If you wish to make a positive contribution to help Native American communities, I would honestly recommend perhaps writing a letter or an email to your congressman to have better hospital facilities in Native American reservations to help rape victims, and perhaps to question unarmed shootings of Native American men within Native American reservations by police. I think those two changes could help decrease the abuses and effectively meet the needs of people suffering within those reservations. Because as it stands, Native American people within reservations effectively live in third world countries within the United States. It is not all that different, in all honesty, when you compare living standards, and that is very tragic. It remains ignored, unfortunately, and most people are apathetic to their plight. I hope that you have found this educational, informative, and on a lighter note, in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in which Native Americans have won a very important legal battle, nearly $1 billion in damages for land disputes, for land that was taken from them in a defense bill, and for other abuses related to that. The compensation stretches from anywhere from $8,000 to $58 million for the underfunding of federal contracts between the U.S. government and Native American reservations. Hopefully this will help in giving quality care to rape victims and perhaps having better tribal police effectively protect these areas, but I'm not sure how soon they will get the actual money for the settlement to do these things. And it still doesn't change the fact that they really do need better hospital care in many of these Native American reservations. And they absolutely deserve to get that. And I hope the federal government does more to stop the sexual violence against Native American women and police violence against Native American men. I would like to thank you all for listening. I know this wasn't an easy topic, but I think it is important to stay informed about these events, these situations, and to be better informed about government abuses upon human beings. Because in all honesty, how can we talk about our values as citizens, how much better it is here, and then ignore this systemic injustice by institutional racism? Moreover, if there can be apathy and complicity in violations towards one ethnic group within a country, why can't that expand to other ethnic groups within the country, or even the abuse of all citizens? But mostly, no human being deserves to go through such hardships which should not even be hardships. And I hope this has made you more aware, and this has made you more informed on what has been going on, and more motivated to take a stand for social justice. And to all Native American people listening, if there are any, I apologize if any of this sounded patronizing or insulting in any way. That was not my intention. I hope this podcast has led to a more positive understanding and empathy for fellow human beings. I've also written an article a while ago regarding this, which I will put in the description. I would ask that you please read it in case there is information there that I failed to go over in this podcast. Again, thank you for listening.